Left hand of God is named. I'm here with really a very important message for this time of year. I think it's something that we all need to put into practice. Let's take the Christ out of Christmas. I know people have been telling you just the opposite. Let's put the Christ back in Christmas. But now think about Christmas. What do you get? You get a whole bunch of presents of things you don't need. Is that in the teachings of Jesus? I mean, we get lots and lots of food and desserts and chocolate. Is that something that Jesus preached? But do we want to give these things up? Come on, it's a lot of fun. So instead of putting the Christ back in Christmas, let's just give Christmas a different name. You know, that'll be our get a whole bunch of things day. And then we'll have another day to celebrate Christ consciousness. And I've been thinking about that. It can't be Christmas because that means Christmas, and a Mass, of course, is a Catholic ritual. So it will be something like Christ-Rite Day, because it'll be the rites dealing with Christ consciousness. And you know, we won't sing Christmas songs about Santa Claus and stuff. We'll do chants instead. So we could gather up a bunch of us and we'll go door to door and chant in front of people's doors. I think that'll help them out a little. And then, you know, there would be no giving of presents. That's just material things. We'll give science of mind treatments instead. So we'll tell all the kids, when you get up that day, you're going to get a new treatment. It's going to be exciting. We can't have Santa Claus coming, St. Nicholas, but Santa Angelo will come to everybody's house on that day. We're working on how to get him down the chimney. So when we've got that in place, we'll have our new holiday. You know, how can we really celebrate Christ consciousness if that's what we want at this time of year? And of course, to do that, we have to figure out what the heck is it. And, you know, as Patty mentioned, we could just as soon call it Buddhist consciousness or Taoist consciousness. And what it is, it's that consciousness of connection, as you mentioned, not separation. It's the consciousness of connection. Because we are intimately connected to the universe. The universe as we know it does not exist except through our consciousness. And I want to explain that a little more. There were some early experiments done in physics that showed beyond any doubt that energy is a wave. A wave is a form that takes place over a space. And then there were some other experiments, and Einstein looked at these and did the calculations and said, well, this obviously shows that energy is a quanta, a piece of things, and therefore that it's matter. It must be matter itself, such as we have an electron in electricity. We have light and we have photons. And now this created, of course, all kinds of problems because now we have energy as a wave and energy as a piece of matter. And the two things are the exact opposite. And so the question was, well, when does it change from one to the other? You know, what kinds of things make it matter part of the time and waves part of the time? And so they did all of these experiments, many different designs. You know, how creative could you be and how you could make a design that would show us when it's each. And with all of that work over, you know, the past 80 years or so, one thing has proven out over all of it, that energy is matter when we choose to measure it as matter, And it is waves when we choose to measure it as waves. That is the only distinction any physicist has been able to make. I mentioned my friend who's a subatomic particle physicist at Oxford, and he's dealing with the properties of matter, and he said the main thing they're working on is, as scientists, they're trying to figure out a way to define reality without having to rely on consciousness. Because right now, the best physics in the world, when you get down to defining the reality that we experience, relies on consciousness. In other words, on the measurements that we make. And in these experiments, they found, as they got more sophisticated, you could elicit energy before you decided how you were going to measure it, and then have the device that would measure either waves or matter after you had already sent the energy out, and it still didn't matter. Whichever way it was chosen to look at it, whichever way it was chosen to experience it, as wave or as matter, that's what it would be. Now, what does it tell us about reality? You know, reality is there. It's not like the energy isn't there unless you decide it beforehand. Reality is there. If you plant apple seeds and your plan is to pick oranges, you've got a problem. But if you go into a forest with the idea of finding apples, you're going to have a much higher probability of finding apples. So that reality is there. And I want to give another example of that. Jean and I are planning to go visit Benjamin, our son, in England soon, and we're thinking, well, it would be good to get some extra money to do that with. Those are expensive trips. And so we kind of start put in mind getting money, and amazingly, I held out my hand and money didn't fall out of the sky. I didn't come up with a lottery ticket that suddenly had a bunch of money. But I've worked with a woman for years who just went to work for this company that gets a great deal of funding from the federal government to help independent living centers, and they just decided to form a contract with me for about $1,600 to help mentor another agency. A kind of contract that was never available for me in the past, that suddenly has just come up when we've decided that we want to do something about raising some more money. And you see, it's the work we put into it. I mean, I've been doing things on the state level that are helping the other independent living centers for the last year or two now. So it's not that the reality didn't exist, but for it to come within the form at this time that's going to give us what we were looking for is because of our state of mind. And what I think is interesting too is the money is not the Christ consciousness. The apples that you get are not the Christ consciousness. They're the result of it, the manifestation of it, but they're not the Christ consciousness. So what is the Christ consciousness itself? You know, we are an intimate part of reality. All of the time, whether we ever know it in our lifetimes or not, that's true. And our subconscious knows that. But our conscious minds have it trained out of them. As we grow, we are untaught what's already in us. until we have learned to look at the world as separate. We've learned to look at us and them, or us and everything else, and those things are doing this. And so what Christ consciousness is, it's when that you already know, that's already inside you, comes into your actual consciousness. And now your consciousness is connected to this unconscious knowledge you already have, which is your oneness with all things. And when you can really, truly embrace your oneness with all things, then you are truly embracing your oneness with the divine. And that's what Christ consciousness is. And I tell you that there is a love, a harmony, and a peace that can come from that connection with the divine that we will never get from the physical things in our lives. And they're good. They're wonderful. I've been making my list for Christmas. I mean, I'm not saying I've been all good, but maybe enough to get a few things. The physical world we live in is part of it. We want to be here. It's a manifestation we can embrace. But we have an option above that. We have an option that will bring us so much more. And that is what the Christ consciousness gives us. Not the manifestation that may result, but the state of mind that can put us there, that puts us in direct connection with the divine. And so when we want a day of celebration, or we want to celebrate Christ consciousness, it can't be one day a year. That's going to be meaningless. It can't be one day a month or one day a week. If we want Christ consciousness and celebrate that, that's what we have to start living. I mean, maybe we should be saying, good morning and happy Christ consciousness to you. Because what we need to do is to make that part of our existence. Not just the search for Christ consciousness, but the celebration of Christ consciousness. Because it's in that celebration of who we are, that celebration of our connection, that's what brings us all the way there. Because the divine is joy, and it is love, and it's elation. And so if we actually bring ourselves into that Christ consciousness, we bring ourselves into that celebration. And so, happy Christ consciousness to you all.